Welcome to Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio News Talk 1180 for the best in Saturday Talk Radio at 1 o'clock and on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock Saturday. And for the very best in Wednesday Talk Radio on 1410 KERI, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock. And now we're on Albuquerque on 1000 KKIM. I'm Marty Pay, and my co-host is Clay Kerner, who will not be here this week. Behind the big board is my main man, Greg Held, making sure this thing works well. We had a great show last week talking to Sally Pipes, president of the Pacific Research Institute, about Obamacare. There's some really interesting things happening to our healthcare system in the next year or two, and it's going to be a real rocky ride. Today's show is a show that's been running through my mind since Tom Brokaw did his famous book, The Greatest Generation. Last year we were involved in the honor flight, and we had Lily Marsh on the show talking about the program that takes World War II veterans, the greatest generation, back to Washington, D.C. to see the World War II memorial. One of the comments she made is that we're losing that generation at a rapid rate. Just this week we lost actors Charles Durning. He was 89 years old, and Charles Durning was one of those character actors that everybody knows who he is once you see his face. He was one of the soldiers in the first wave in Normandy. He was the only guy to survive in his platoon. And then Jack Klugman also died this week, 90 years old. So we're losing this generation at a rapid rate. So I realized that if I was going to do this show on the greatest generation, it's best if I do it sooner rather than later. So in my situation, the three members of the greatest generation closest to me were my mom, who lived through the Nazi occupation in Holland, and she even played with Anne Frank as a child. Second was my stepdad, Pops, who was half Czech and half German. So because he was half German, he was expendable. So he ended up in special forces in the German army. And he was expendable, so he was on the Russian front the whole time. And he never really talked about his experiences that much because he was in the thick of it all. Stalingrad and some of the most ferocious battles of World War II. Pops is gone now, and I wish I would have had this time with him, but we'll talk to my mom a little bit about his experience as part of the greatest generation. And the third is my dad, who in later life, he and I built a really, really good relationship. He was a Canadian soldier in World War II, where he met a young Dutch girl in Amsterdam. In 1950, after I was born, he fought in Korea and was wounded 3 times. So we'll talk to him in the second part of the show. But in the first half of the show, we're going to talk to my mom, Antonia Pasica. Mom, welcome to the show.
Okay.
So, Mom, you've had a pretty interesting life so far. You went through the Depression as a little girl, and then World War II, with the Nazi occupation, and then moving to 2 new countries in your life, twice in your life. So, tell me, what was it like growing up in Europe during the Depression? What was that like?
Well, I was about 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And the Germans came in, and right away we had no tea, no coffee. We got 5 pounds of, they say kilo, and it's like 2 pounds. And we got it for about a month.
2 pounds of what, Mom?
Of potatoes.
Okay, so you didn't have any protein other than the potatoes, pretty much, right?
Yeah, and we had towards the end we had sugar beets.
Oh boy, sugar beets instead of potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you couldn't go to the store to buy anything when the Nazis took over.
Oh no, we couldn't go any place.
Yeah, so pretty much they had they rationed out the food to you, and that was it.
That was it.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, you mentioned the tea, because I remember when Nana, my grandmother, was alive, she, I guess this was just something that she carried over from the Depression and from the war. She used to hoard tea like crazy.
Yeah, she hoard tea like crazy, and she also coffee.
Uh-huh.
And she said to me, I break your neck when you're going to tell my neighbors. And she told her neighbor herself.
I remember when we finally moved her into the nursing home, and she was in her 80s, I guess. But anyways, Dad and I went through the place, and she had, I think it was 80 or 90 boxes of tea hidden, just in case we had another war.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found most fascinating growing up is I remember you talking about your best friend lived next door to this little Jewish girl that you used to play with, Anne Frank.
Yeah, Anne Frank.
Yeah, so your best friend Corey lived next door to Anne Frank?
Corey was the one who lived about 3 or 4 houses past
Anne Frank?
Anne Clan. And Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember going back to Europe in 1980. You and I went to Europe to see some family. And one of the things on my list is I wanted to see the Anne Frank house. And the day I was scheduled to go, they closed the house because the father, who was the only one who survived the war, had died the day before. It was in 1980 when he passed away. So they closed up the house. But I remember that neighborhood. It wasn't too far from where you grew up as a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the stories that I remember you telling me growing up, and I mentioned this in a book that I wrote years ago, is my grandfather, your dad, took you to see something an event that happened after the Nazis killed a bunch of people?
Yeah, they killed a lot of women and men, and he took me down there, and my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, well, you won't forget.
So he took you to see, was it the coffins or the dead bodies? Or
the dead bodies.
Yeah, and they were lined up in a warehouse after they had been shot by the Nazis. It was the resistance.
They were in the casket.
Uh-huh. So you saw them in the warehouse just laying there. He didn't want you to forget that experience when it happened.
Yeah.
Yep. We're having a conversation with a member of the greatest generation, my mom, Antonia Pasica, who lived through the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. So you also told a story about wood fences. What happened with all the wood that used to be under the bridges and the dams and everything in Holland?
Well, all the women, they took a piece and they burned it up. Like, we had no coal.
Uh-huh.
We had nothing.
Uh-huh.
We had nothing, period. And I was about 93 pounds.
Wow.
And then anyway, my mother took a big piece of wood, and she said to me, you go in the upstairs, and I lean it against the window.
So you guys ended up stripping the wood off the bottom of the bridges over the canals and everything because you needed that for firewood. So yeah. Well, you do what you have to do in that kind of situation. I remember you telling me too as a little boy the story of how you could hear the sirens, the police sirens, as the Nazis were going out at night. And then all of a sudden, they'd stop at somebody's house, and you'd pray it wasn't your house because, you'd hear the commotion when they stopped, and the people were drug out of their house, and then you'd go there and see they weren't there, and they never came back. They either ended up in a concentration camp or, were shot in some warehouse somewhere.
Yeah, one during the night,
mm-hmm.
I kept dreaming, and I said to myself, it's a dream. And then I got up. One night I got up and they stopped right in front of our window,
mm-hmm.
and we saw the Germans, and she said, "Sei ruhig," to the woman,
which means
who
what?
Was crying.
Mm-hmm.
It means sei ruhig, rustig.
That means silence, right?
Yeah, silence.
Mm-hmm.
And they were crying,
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now, and you and I have had this conversation about the concentration camps. Now, here it is. You're in Amsterdam. And I know Dad, said that they didn't know about the concentration camps, but you said you guys knew about the camps early on in the war.
Yeah, we knew about the camps, and they were all over.
Mm-hmm. So what, people had brought back pictures or something? Or how did you guys know about the camps?
Well, word of mouth.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't dare print it.
Mm-hmm.
So we word of mouth.
Uh-huh. So people came back and told you about the camps, because that's one of the things that history's still judging this, but a lot of the German people said, well, we had no way of knowing, we didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know.
I question that, because here it is, here you're in an occupied land and you guys knew about it.
Yeah.
So
we knew about it, and the Germans they closed their eyes.
Yeah, the Germans closed their eyes to it. I agree with that. When we come back from the break, Mom, I want to talk a little bit about Dad's experience in the war, Pops' experience. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio News Talk 1180.